Everyone told him that rusty container by the harbor was cursed, and now he finally understands why. A broke veteran spent his last $2 on an abandoned ship container praying for just one warm place to sleep with his loyal German shepherd. But on the very first night, the dog started clawing and barking at the steel floor, like something or someone was trapped beneath them. When he ripped up the metal panels, he uncovered a secret hidden from the whole town for decades. What they found inside didn't just change his life. It brought an entire community to its knees. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always incredible seeing how far these stories travel. Winter fog swallowed Astoria's harbor, the wind smelling of salt rust and forgotten dreams. Ethan Cole walked slowly along the cracked concrete of the port boots, crunching on scattered ice. He was a veteran in his mid-60s, tall yet thin, his shoulders still squared like a soldier, standing at attention. His face was carved by years of battles, both foreign and domestic, with deep lines around the eyes, where sadness had settled like a permanent tenant. His beard was trimmed but peppered with more silver than black, and his hair, once full and dark, now hung in messy strands beneath a faded wool cap. Despite the weight of the years pressing on his ribs, Ethan's posture remained upright, as though his spine remembered a duty that his heart could not forget. Beside him trotted Max, his loyal German shepherd, about 7 years old, strong and alert, with black and gray fur, thick enough to face any northern storm. Max's amber eyes scanned everything: movement, sound, threat, hope. He was both guardian and family, and the silent proof that Ethan was not entirely alone in this world. They had nothing left except each other. Ethan's last disability check had evaporated into rent food, and the cruel randomness of life, just as luck had evaporated from his world after the war. He had lost his wife Anna to illness years before. He had lost his peace even earlier. Max, once a rescue dog assigned to veterans with PTSD, had saved him many nights when nightmares tore open old wounds. Now Max was the one thing that made Ethan feel human, not just a forgotten relic washed ashore. The cold nipped at Ethan's fingers as he reached into his pocket and squeezed 2 crumpled dollar bills, literally his last $2. And yet his steps did not slow. Something ahead of him, half buried in frost and barnacles, seemed to call out. Under towering cranes and abandoned nets lay a rusted ship container, the once blue paint now peeling like dead skin, revealing a heart of corroded steel. Its edges were bent, its doors dented as if it had survived storms and shipwrecks alike. Logically, it wasn't worth a penny. Emotionally, it felt like a last chance. Ethan approached the lone harbor worker overseeing the storage yard. The man was in his 40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a neon beanie and chewing gum while scrolling through his phone. His name stitched on his jacket read Leo. He glanced up briefly with unimpressed gray eyes and asked, "You sure you want that ugly thing?" Ethan nodded, his voice quiet but firm, "I'm sure." Leo shrugged, not caring either way, and took the $2 as if they were tokens in a rigged arcade. "It's yours, old-timer. Just make sure it doesn't collapse on you." He snickered, shaking his head as the veteran walked away. Ethan heard laughter from a group of dockhands nearby. They were younger, loud, wrapped in modern jackets insulated from the cold and from compassion. One of them, a lanky guy with a buzz cut and acne scars on his chin, called out mockingly, "A whole life serving the country to end up sleeping in a shipping box. That's patriotism for you." His buddy wheezed with laughter, adding, "Hey, at least the dog will stay warm when he pisses inside." Ethan did not turn around. He learned long ago that battles worth fighting were rarely fought with fists. Still, each mocking word was a pebble added to the invisible rucksack already crushing his chest. Max, however, growled low, the fur along his back, rising ready to defend the dignity of the man who had once defended an entire nation. Ethan rested a calming hand on the dog's head. "Easy, boy. We've survived worse." But in his heart, shame flickered. Was this truly what remained of a soldier's legacy? He inhaled the sharp ocean air, tasting loneliness, tasting survival. Dragging their few belongings in an old army duffel, they made their way to the container. The doors creaked open with a groan like a dying whale. Inside, darkness pooled thickly, but Ethan imagined warmth and walls shielding them from the brutal wind. He smiled bitterly and whispered, "If Max is with me, any place can be home." Max sniffed every corner, tail wagging once as if approving the new shelter. Ethan spread 2 thin blankets over the cold metal floor, one for Max, one for himself. The container smelled of rust and old seawater, but to Ethan it smelled like survival. As he lit a small battery lantern, soft light chased away the gloom, revealing a cramped space just big enough for one man's hope and one dog's loyalty. Outside, the Columbia River's waves slammed against the pier, heavy and relentless like memory itself. Ethan sat with his back to the metal wall, which immediately stole the warmth from his bones. Max curled beside him, resting his head on Ethan's thigh. Ethan stroked the dog's fur slowly. "We're all right," he murmured, though doubt gnawed at him. In that quiet steel tomb, memories pushed their way into his mind without permission. He saw the desert again, the blazing sun, the grit in his teeth, the screams too loud to be human. He tasted terror and gunpowder. His breathing hitched. Max, sensing the shift, nudged his head into Ethan's chest, grounding him back in the cold present. "Good boy." "I'm here," Ethan whispered. But the truth was, he didn't know how much longer he could hold himself together. He had spent decades serving his country, yet now even the country's gratitude seemed to have rusted away. As night fell, fully wind shrieked like ghosts, scraping claws across the container. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to imagine he was somewhere else, anywhere else. He thought of Anna's laughter, of dancing in the kitchen when they were young and whole. He thought of how she used to say, "Wherever you go, Ethan, take your heart with you." He wondered if maybe he had left his heart on a battlefield long ago. Exhaustion dragged him downward, and he drifted into a fragile sleep. Then Max barked, sharp, urgent, echoing violently in the hollow metal box. Ethan jolted awake, adrenaline snapping through his veins. Max stood, stiff ears pointed, staring down at the floor beneath them. The dog's claws scraped nervously on the steel like he was trying to dig through it. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" Max barked again, louder, pawing furiously at the metal panels as though something beneath his feet was alive, calling, waiting. Ethan pressed his palm to the cold floor. For a moment he thought he felt a tremor, a faint tapping. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only fear behind. The lantern flickered once as if the darkness outside had reached in to breathe on the flame. Ethan swallowed hard, throat tight. They were not alone in this container. The winter night suddenly seemed sharper, more watchful. He stared at the floor, the sense of something hidden crawling beneath his ribs like a warning from the bones of the earth. Max growled low and trembling. Ethan whispered, voice dry, "Whatever you are, please, not tonight." But the tapping sound came again, soft, like knuckles knocking for help. Ethan's heart pounded. In that moment, a chilling certainty formed inside him. He hadn't just bought shelter. He had bought a secret. And secrets always come with a price. The night was so cold, it made the moon look fragile. Wind scraped along the metal walls of the container, as if the sky itself had grown claws, and Ethan Cole woke to the sound of Max barking, with a sharp, panicked edge he had never heard before. The German shepherd's body, was rigid muscles, tensed, ears pointed like arrows at the floor, his amber eyes burning with the kind of alertness that came from instinct, not habit. Ethan's heart slammed painfully in his chest, that old soldier's reflex taking over as he snatched his small flashlight from beside the blanket and clicked it on. The beam wobbled over corrugated steel duffel bag lantern dog, then froze on the spot where Max was pawing. The metal wasn't flat anymore. There in the middle of the floor, a long ripple bulged up, not high but wrong, like the container itself had taken a breath. The light caught dust trembling in the air from Max's frantic scratches. Ethan's swallowed mouth suddenly dry, throat tight, as years of war ghosts tried to crawl back into his lungs. The sound came again, a faint hollow knock from beneath the steel so soft he almost convinced himself he imagined it. Max did not imagine anything. He barked deep and furious, then lowered the bark into a growl that seemed to vibrate straight through Ethan's bones. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, though his voice was thin, his fingers trembling slightly. He forced a crooked grin, the old gallows humor rising like a reflex from his military days. "If it's some kind of monster, make sure it eats me before it gets to you all right." The joke hung in the air, weak but necessary, as if humor were a small shield he could raise against things he did not understand. He knelt and pressed his palm flat to the floor. The steel was bitterly cold, biting his skin. For a second there was nothing, only the wind whining outside. Then tap. A small, deliberate sound. Not a random creak, not the casual settling of old metal. Tap, tap. A rhythm hesitant but intentional, like knuckles on a distant door. Ethan's heart began to pound, in that strange double time he knew too well, the way it did when a memory and a present danger overlapped until he could not tell which life he was living. In his head for a heartbeat, he was back in a half-collapsed building overseas, listening for survivors beneath rubble, counting taps that meant life silence, that meant grief. He jerked his hand back as if burned. "No," he whispered to himself. "That was years ago. Different continent. Different ghosts." He tried to be rational. Maybe the pier beneath had shifted. Maybe some loose cable was knocking in the wind. Maybe a rat or something was trapped in the beams. But Max's reaction didn't fit any of those explanations. The dog lowered his nose to the bulge, sniffed hard, and whined a high, thin sound Ethan had only ever heard when a fellow veteran broke down in the group therapy circle. Max did not sound angry. Max sounded worried. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly, counting in fours the way the therapist had taught him, in hold-out hold. The tapping faded, and the silence that replaced it was somehow worse. He needed air that did not taste of rust and memory. "Come on," he whispered, clipping Max's worn collar to the frayed leash. "Let's see what the night looks like outside." The harbor was a world of ghosts and sodium lights. Fog rolled in thick bands, sliding between stacked containers and abandoned cranes. The Columbia River, black and restless, slammed against the pylons with a rhythm older than the town itself. Ethan pulled his coat tight around his thin frame, feeling the wind pierce through like needles. Max stayed close, pressing against his leg, but his head kept turning back toward their container ears, twitching, as if some invisible voice was calling him home. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind them. Ethan stiffened his body, automatically shifting, so he was slightly in front of Max, shielding without thinking. A beam of white light swept over them, bright, but not hostile, then lowered. "Sir," a woman's voice called out strong and clear over the wind. "You can't just be wandering the yard at this hour." "You all right?" Ethan turned and saw her walking toward them. She was in her early 30s, tall and athletic, wearing a dark harbor security jacket zipped up to her chin, a utility belt on her hips, and a navy beanie pulled over long chestnut hair tied in a low ponytail. Her skin was a warm olive tone wind-burned on the cheeks from too many nights like this, and her eyes were a sharp sea green that missed very little. Her jawline was defined, giving her a serious, almost stern appearance, but there was no cruelty there, only caution and a weariness that did not belong to someone her age. A silver badge on her jacket read, M. Pierce. She stopped a few feet away, assessing Ethan and Max, as if weighing threat versus vulnerability. "Name's Mara Pierce," she said. "Harbor Security. You the guy who bought that old container this afternoon?" There was no mockery in her voice, just a tired professionalism, like someone who had seen too many strange things at odd hours. Ethan nodded, shifting his weight. "Yeah, Ethan Cole." He held up the crumpled receipt Leo had given him. "Didn't mean to cause trouble. My dog heard something. I just needed some air." Mara's gaze drifted to Max, who watched her with alert suspicion. She softened slightly. "German Shepherd, huh? Beautiful dog. Looks like he takes his job seriously." Her eyes returned to Ethan's face, lingering on the lines around his eyes, the military posture he couldn't quite shake. "You ex-service?" she asked quietly, not as an accusation, but as recognition. Ethan's mouth twitched in a small, humorless smile. "Something like that." Mara nodded once, the way soldiers and those who'd worked with them often did, a silent acknowledgement of burdens carried. "Look," she continued, voice lowering. "This yard isn't exactly a playground. Some of these containers have unstable floors, rusted beams, that kind of thing. You hear anything weird? It's probably just metal settling. This place is older than both of us put together." She paused, then added, "Or rats. This harbor is basically a buffet for them." Ethan hesitated, then decided to risk sounding crazy. This wasn't settling. It was knocking. From under the floor. In a pattern. Mara's brows knitted, and for a second something like discomfort flashed across her face. She glanced toward the dark outline of his container. "That one used to be flagged, you know," she said slowly. "Back when I first started here. My supervisor said it once held recovered property from a wrecked vessel, personal effects paperwork, stuff the insurance companies didn't know where to fill. There was some mix-up, the owners couldn't be traced, budgets got cut, and eventually they just stopped caring. It sat there for years until someone finally decided to unload it for scrap space." She shifted her weight boots, crunching on the frosty gravel. "People around here say it's bad luck. That's why nobody wanted it even for storage. But bad luck doesn't scare most folks. What scares them is paperwork." She forced a dry smile, trying to lighten the mood, but her eyes still looked toward the container with a flicker of unease. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. So it held. "Personal effects?" he asked quietly. "From people who didn't make it?" Mara nodded once. "That's the story. You know how it is with harbors, everyone's got a cousin's friend who swears they know the truth. Me, I just know it's old and forgotten." She studied him for a second longer. "If you hear anything dangerous like collapsing beams, gas leaks, whatever, you come find me at the shack near the gate." "All right, I pull the night shift most weekends. I don't want to scrape you or your dog off the concrete." The bluntness was wrapped in concern, not contempt. Ethan gave a small nod of gratitude. "Thank you, Ms. Pierce." "Mara's fine," she replied, then turned away, her flashlight beam slicing through the fog as she walked back along the row of containers. Ethan watched her go, thinking that she moved like someone used to being the one who stayed awake while others slept, a watcher of thresholds. He wondered briefly what had put that weight in her step. Maybe she had lost someone to the sea, too. Back inside the container, the air felt even colder, as if their brief absence had allowed the night to seep deeper into the walls. Ethan unhooked Max's leash, and the dog went straight back to the bulging patch of floor nose pressed to the steel body, quivering with tense focus. Ethan knelt again, slower this time, his knees was protesting. He set the flashlight on its side so the beam washed across the metal. Now he saw it clearly. The bulge wasn't random. There was a faint line, almost invisible beneath rust and grime, forming a rectangle, as though someone had cut a hatch into the floor long ago and painted over it to hide the seam. His breath froze in his chest. The container had a secret built into its bones. Of course, he muttered under his breath, because sleeping in a giant metal mystery box wasn't exciting enough. He ran his fingertips along the seam, feeling where the paint chipped, where the edge lifted just a fraction. Max whined, nudging Ethan's wrist urgently, then pressed his ear to the metal like he was listening for a heartbeat. Ethan followed the dog's lead and lowered his own head cheek, brushing the cold floor. At first, there was only the dull echo of his own pulse. Then, faint but unmistakable tap, tap, tap. Tap. There was a pause, then the pattern repeated, a hesitant rhythm that stirred something deep in his memory. It sounded like the desperate Morse code improvisations soldiers used when radios were smashed and rubble swallowed their voices. Ethan's throat tightened. His mind flashed back to a time when men trapped beneath collapsed walls had tapped messages with broken fingers, each knock saying, "I'm still here. Please don't forget me." He pushed the memory away, focusing on the present. Whatever was under there wasn't a living person, that much he knew. There was no space beneath the container for a man to lie, no heat radiating through the steel, no smell of sweat or breath. And yet the knocking felt alive in a different way. It carried intention, not malice. It wasn't trying to scare him away. It was begging him to come closer. "You're not a monster, are you?" he whispered to the unseen thing. "You're just stuck." Max answered with a soft huff, as if in agreement. Ethan retrieved the small multi-tool knife he kept in his duffel, its handle worn smooth from years of use. He wedged the tip carefully into the shallow gap, where rust had loosened, applying pressure until the metal squealed. Flakes of old paint fell like snow. The hatch shifted a hair's breadth, then stuck. Ethan strained muscles in his forearms, burning, but he was older now, and the steel had spent years fusing into itself. Finally, he stopped, breath fogging in the lamplight, arm trembling. The hatch had moved just enough to prove it was real, but not enough to reveal what lay beneath. He could try again harder, risk tearing his hands open, or he could wait until he had better tools, maybe even another pair of human hands. He thought of Mara Pierce, of her flashlight beam and steady voice. Someone like her would not scare easily, and she had every reason to be curious about what the harbor had chosen to bury inside one of its own cast-offs. Max nudged his elbow as if urging him not to give up. Ethan rested his palm on the dog's head. "Tomorrow," he murmured. "We'll get it open tomorrow. Whatever's down there has waited this long. One more night won't kill it." The tapping had stopped for the moment, leaving a silence that was no longer empty, but expectant like a held breath. He lay back on his blanket, muscles aching, mind racing. Max curled against his side, but instead of drifting into deep sleep, the dog remained half alert, ears twitching at every distant creak. Ethan stared up at the dark ceiling, listening to the soft, intermittent sounds of the harbor. Every now and then he thought he heard that gentle knocking, again faint, patient, not threatening him, not chasing him away. It sounded less like a warning and more like an invitation, a plea from whatever lives in memory and steel and forgotten promises. "Please find me." Please don't let me rust away in the dark. Morning arrived reluctantly, shivering in a pale gray light that slipped weakly through the dented walls of the container. Ethan Cole woke with the stiff ache of age and the heavier ache of unanswered questions. Max, already alert, stood near the hidden hatch tail, stiff and ears angled toward the steel, like an antenna tuned to the unknown. The tapping had stopped sometime during the night, but its memory pulsed in the air, an invisible heartbeat beneath the floor. Ethan sat up slowly, stretching his sore back, and stared at the seam he had exposed. Today he would tear it fully open, because whatever was down there was calling no pleading to be found. And Ethan Cole had lived his whole life responding to distress calls. He grabbed his old duffel and dug through pockets, finding a small crowbar he'd once used for repairs on a camper van he never quite restored. The tool was battered, the handle scuffed, the metal nicked, but it felt solid in his grip. Max paced anxiously, occasionally pawing at the hatch, as if urging Ethan to hurry. "I got it, buddy," Ethan muttered. "We'll see what the sea left behind." He wedged the crowbar deeper this time, leaning his weight into it. The steel groaned like a wounded animal. Rust cracked and flaked away in red dust. With a sudden sharp pop, the edge tore loose and the hatch shifted upward several inches, exhaling a stale breath of air that smelled faintly of salt wood and forgotten time. Max froze, sniffing the stream of cold air rising from below, then gave a short, encouraging bark. Ethan's pulse quickened, not with fear now, but curiosity mixed with reverence. He braced his shoulders, lifted again, and the hatch swung open fully, hinges grinding in reluctant resurrection. Beneath lay a steep, narrow ladder descending into a compartment barely lit by Ethan's lantern above. The space looked like a hidden pocket carved into the ship container's belly. He flicked on his flashlight and peered down. The beam revealed a small chamber lined with marine-grade steel and scattered with wooden Navy crates, their surfaces branded with military markings, faded by age. Serial numbers, coordinates, the Navy anchor emblem, almost invisible under grime. These were not random objects tossed aside. They had been placed here deliberately. Protected. Concealed. Ethan climbed down carefully, Max staying at the opening, watching intensely. The air below was cold, as if sealed away from the world for decades. Ethan's boots hit the metal floor with a hollow ring. He knelt beside the nearest crate and brushed dust off the lid. Personal effects. Recovery Team 14 Vessel Mariner's Hope. He knew that name. Everyone in Astoria did. It was the fishing boat that vanished 12 years ago with 5 local crewmen aboard. There had been no bodies, only a few fragments of the hull discovered after a storm. The town never healed from that wound. Ethan's breath caught as he realized he had not uncovered garbage, he had unearthed grief. He pulled open the first crate. Inside, rows of letters sealed in envelopes yellowed with age, bound in twine. Each carried an address of someone in this town, wives, mothers, sons, daughters. Messages from sailors who never returned. Messages that were never delivered. His hands trembled as he lifted a handful of envelopes, glancing at the names: Mrs. Ellen Crane, Mr. Thomas Avery, the Callahan family. Notes meant to soothe hearts that instead were left shattered in doubt. Ethan's throat tightened painfully. He could almost feel the weight of those years of unanswered prayers. Max whined softly at the hatch, sensing his humans shift into sorrow. Ethan carefully set the letters aside and reached into a second crate. Inside were dog tags, neatly paired, polished, clean, tucked into small cloth pouches. It was too careful to be an accident. Someone had lovingly curated these relics of lost men, intending to return them home, until something stopped them. He opened another container, journals. Some leather-bound and water-stained, others made of cheap paper held together with tape. One had Ethan's breath freezing mid-air because he saw a name that struck like a blow. Samuel Sam Hayes, his best friend, his brother in arms, the man who once took a bullet meant for him. Sam's journal looked battered, edges rippled from moisture but intact. Ethan's hands shook visibly as he opened it. Inside Sam's handwriting, strong, messy, familiar, rushed back like a voice rising out of deep water. "If Ethan ever gets this, tell him I kept my promise. I'm coming home." The words blurred as tears filled Ethan's eyes before he could stop them. Memories stormed through him, laughing in the barracks, Sam cursing at canned rations, Sam promising he'd live long enough to see the Pacific coast. And now Ethan was sitting above Sam's final message, locked in a coffin of rust and secrets. He turned a page. A letter was tucked inside, sealed but addressed in Sam's handwriting to Ethan Cole. Ethan's breath hitched as he slid his thumb under the brittle flap and opened the letter. Max padded down the ladder while he read, resting his head gently on Ethan's knee as if bracing him against the past. "Brother, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it back. I'm sorry. I tried like hell. But I need you to do something for me. Live. Live the life we promised we would. Live enough for the both of us. And when you feel alone, think of this ocean. It remembers every man it takes. It remembers love, too." Ethan pressed his forehead to the paper, his shoulders shaking, breath tearing ragged from his chest. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to cry, not the silent kind that leaks out at night, but a raw, wrenching grief that clawed its way out from years of being buried alive inside him. Max whimpered, nuzzling closer, offering the comfort only a creature who knows sorrow can give. Footsteps clanged above them. Ethan startled, wiping his face, quickly bracing himself. Mara Pierce's head appeared through the hatch, her sea-green eyes widening, as she took in the crates, the envelopes, the dog tags. She climbed down silently, boots landing softly, as though afraid to disturb the sanctity of this hidden tomb. What is this?" she whispered, awe and horror mixing in her voice. Ethan's jaw tightened. "These are the voices of the missing," he said. "Someone gathered these. Someone meant to bring them home, but didn't." Mara knelt, fingers brushing lightly over a sealed bundle of letters. Her expression shifted, no longer skeptical, but deeply moved. "My uncle was on the Mariner's Hope," she admitted quietly. "My aunt. She never stopped setting a plate for him at dinner." Her eyes glistened with a grief she had locked away. These families, they deserved closure. Ethan nodded, gripping Sam's letter. "They still do." Max nudged Sam's journal as if urging Ethan toward something more. And that was when Ethan saw a sealed metal tube beneath the journals, tucked carefully at the bottom of the crate. It was stamped with a naval insignia and a date nearly 2 decades old. Mara picked it up with gloved hands, turning it slowly. "This looks official," she murmured. "Restricted communications, maybe." Ethan felt a ripple of dread. The container hadn't been abandoned out of neglect. It had been hidden. Someone didn't want these truths to surface. Max growled at something unseen, fur rising a warning. Ethan heard it. Then the faint tapping again, no longer beneath the floor, but echoing faintly from somewhere deeper within the storage walls. Slow, patient, calling them further. Not finished. Not yet. Morning sunlight finally broke through the coastal fog, casting a pale glow over Astoria, as if the sky itself had been crying for years and was only now remembering how to shine. Ethan Cole stood outside the rusted container, a stack of carefully bundled letters in his trembling hands, his aging heart pounding with a purpose he never thought he would feel again. Max trotted beside him, alert and proud, tail swaying like a banner of hope in the salty breeze. Mara Pierce had gone ahead to speak to a few townspeople she knew personally, those whose loved ones had vanished with the crew of the Mariner's Hope. And soon she returned accompanied by 3 figures who moved slowly, as though each step was weighted with years of grief that never had a name, only emptiness. They approached cautiously, eyes flicking from the container to Ethan, to the bundle of letters he held, not daring to trust what hope might deliver. The first was Ellen Crane, an elderly woman with silver hair braided neatly down her back, hands wrinkled and trembling from age and heartbreak. Her soft blue eyes, once known for laughter, had faded to a stormy gray that mirrored the ocean that stole her son. She was petite, shoulders curved inward, like she'd spent years trying to shield herself from bad news that never arrived. She clutched a rosary in one hand like a lifeline she refused to let go. Behind her stood Thomas Avery, a big man with a barrel chest and thick beard gone wild and white, the kind of beard that spoke more of neglect than pride. His clothes looked worn but carefully kept, buttons polished, and boots scuffed but sturdy. His eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights and old tears. He had once captained a fishing boat before his only son disappeared on the Mariner's Hope. Beside him was Ruby Callahan, a woman in her mid-40s with short auburn hair, freckles scattered across cheeks, hardened by loss. She had dressed as if for church, dark coat-polished shoes, but her hands betrayed her nails bitten to the quick from years of waiting for a knock on the door that never came. Mara placed a gentle hand on Ruby's back, guiding her forward. Ethan's voice caught for a moment as he looked at them. He wasn't sure if he had not the right to step into their grief, nor the right to give them news that would undo the painful acceptance they had clung to. But the truth was a gift buried alive too long. He cleared his throat, softly, eyes lowered in respect. "These were meant for you," he said simply, offering the letters. Ellen reached first, fingers shaking as she pulled the twine loose. She unfolded a slightly crumpled envelope addressed in handwriting she would know anywhere. Her son, Michael Crane, had always looped his G's too big. The moment she saw his familiar script, her breath broke like a wave crashing against unyielding rocks. She read the first line, then pressed the paper to her chest, tears streaming down her weathered face. But she was laughing through them, laughing like someone who had been underwater too long, and finally broke the surface. He apologized, she whispered through tears, eyes shimmering with the kind of joy only grief can understand. About the car, the old one he dented backing out. He promised he would fix it when he got back. Her voice collapsed into sobs, and Thomas Avery stepped forward, big hands fumbling as he opened his own envelope. His face, usually hard and stoic, crumbled as he read a message from his son addressed to Dad. There was no apology in that letter, only love and a confession of fear and yet hope, too. Thomas's massive shoulders shook as he clutched the paper to his heart, murmuring his son's name like a prayer. Ruby Callahan didn't open hers right away. She held it gently, as though afraid it would vanish if handled too roughly. When she finally slit the top and saw her brother's handwriting, she froze. He'd drawn a tiny doodle of a fish in the corner of the letter. He always did that. The edges of Ruby's lips twitched upward into a trembling smile. He remembered, she breathed. He remembered my stupid drawings. Mara pressed a hand to her mouth, blinking hard, looking up at the sky as if to hide her tears from the world. More people arrived, drawn by the murmurs on the wind, neighbors, distant relatives, even strangers who had only known the lost sailors through hearsay. The crowd grew, and every new arrival brought fresh sobs, laughter, and whispered thank yous into the crisp air. Ethan became the center of a silent circle of gratitude, though he kept trying to shrink from it. He didn't feel like a hero, he felt like a messenger stumbling into a sacred place. Max, however, accepted every touch and every tear that fell into his fur tail, wagging slowly, eyes soft with empathy. Only animals seemed to speak fluently. Children ran up to him, hugging him tight, and he allowed it all, proud of his role in this miracle. Then came a woman who had not cried yet. Margaret Hayes, Sam's mother. Her dark hair streaked with white framed a face carved by strength and stubbornness. She stood taller than Ellen, more poised than Ruby, and calmer than Thomas, but her eyes, they carried a galaxy of unshed sorrow. Ethan recognized her instantly. She had attended Sam's funeral and refused to wear black, claiming her son would never forgive her if she dressed like she'd given up. Ethan extended Sam's journal and letter to her with shaking hands. "He wrote to you too," he whispered. Margaret accepted them, but it took a long moment before she dared look at the page. When she finally did, the facade shattered. Her lips quivered, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. She reached out and grabbed Ethan's arm, fingers digging through the fabric of his jacket. "Thank you," she breathed, raw and broken. "You brought my boy home." Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. His heart was too full. His chest hurt in a way that was strangely healing. People surrounded him now, touching his back, taking his hands, whispering grateful blessings, thanking him for giving them something even death had not taken fully away. A town once haunted by unanswered questions suddenly felt lighter, as though the wind sweeping off the Columbia carried hope instead of sorrow. And through it all, Max stood guard, his amber eyes bright with pride at his human. Later, as the sun dipped low and colors of gold and rose painted the harbor, Ethan found himself alone again inside the container. The letters were gone, returned to those who needed them. But the compartment below still held secrets, dog tags, journals, a mysterious naval cylinder, and that faint knocking that still had no explanation. Mara returned, leaning against the doorway. Her eyes were still red, but calmer now. "You know," she said softly, "I think the town needed this. Needed you." Ethan chuckled weakly, rubbing Max's ears. "I'm just an old man sleeping in a box." Mara shook her head. "No, you brought the dead back to life. That's more than any officer, any mayor, any priest has ever done for this town." Ethan didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being thanked for anything. Then from deep inside the hidden chamber, the tapping came again, more urgent now. Not asking to be found, commanding it. Max stiffened, growling lightly. Mara's eyes widened, the earlier warmth replaced by cold uncertainty. "Ethan," she whispered, "what else is down there?" Ethan reached for the crowbar once more, feeling determination settle in like an anchor. "We're going to find out." Because healing the town was only the beginning. The ocean keeps many secrets, and not all of them want to stay buried. Astoria was a town held together by tides and tragedy, yet in the wake of recovered letters and resurrected love, something shifted in its heartbeat. Days passed and word spread quickly of the veteran and his loyal German shepherd who had brought home voices lost to the sea. Gratitude turned to action, and action became transformation. The once forgotten shipping container, rust-eaten, dented, and abandoned, slowly began to change. Volunteers from the harbor arrived, first welders with sunburnt faces and calloused hands, carpenters with tool belts rattling like bells of salvation, and neighbors who barely knew Ethan's name but knew he had healed something sacred. They patched the holes with fresh steel, installed insulation, wired in electricity, and even repainted the outside in a deep navy blue that shimmered faintly beneath the coastal sun. A donated wood-burning stove, small but stubbornly warm, was fitted against the back wall, its chimney jutting proudly like a victory flag. Ethan stood among them as they worked around him, his tired heart swelling with humility and confusion. He had never asked for kindness. He barely believed he deserved it. Yet people gathered anyway, laughing and arguing over measurements, bringing spare furniture, homemade quilts, and fresh-baked bread. Max supervised it all with noble authority, his black and gray coat, gleaming tail thumping whenever someone offered a scratch behind the ear or a treat slipped from a grateful palm. It was Max, after all, who had first heard the heartbeat of the truth buried beneath their feet. One man who spent the entire afternoon rewiring lights introduced himself simply as Franklin Boyd, a retired electrician in his 70s with broad shoulders and a snow-white mustache that curled upward like a silent joke. His eyes were pale green and tired, but still capable of mischief, and he moved with the stubborn determination of someone who refused to admit to a single ache in his old bones. He told Ethan while tightening bolts along the exterior frame that he had lost a cousin at sea once, not to the mariner's hope, but years before when storms did not wait for men to say goodbye. Helping Ethan felt like setting one more soul free. Beside him worked a teenage girl named Penny Morales, no more than 16, with curly dark hair pulled into a frizzy ponytail and a jacket far too big for her narrow shoulders. Her hands were clumsy with tools, but she tried harder than anyone. Penny rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when she did, her voice carried a bright tremor of hope, as if she saw in Ethan a reminder that even broken things could become beautiful again. Mara Pierce visited often whenever she was off shift. In daylight, she carried heavy beams and handed down screws. In the evenings, she brought dinner warm soup in reusable containers and thick bread with butter that melted instantly. She never said she came to check on him, but Max always greeted her first, letting out a single approving bark as she approached like a guardian signaling she's one of us. Her eyes seemed lighter in those moments, the burden of watchfulness replaced by something almost gentle. As the final screw tightened and the door hung straight, Ethan's home looked nothing like the cold box he had crawled into that first night. Inside, warm lamplight glowed across wood paneling donated by the Avery family, and colorful patchwork blankets gifted by Mrs. Crane softened the metal bunks. The air smelled faintly of cedar and sea salt. For the first time in so long, he could not remember the place where he laid. His head felt like a home. When night arrived, people drifted away with waves of smiles and handshakes. Franklin promised to return the next day to fix a loose hinge. Penny embarrassedly shoved a small potted plant into Ethan's hands. "Plants clean the air," she whispered, cheeks pink as she hurried away. Mara lingered at the threshold, her breath swirling in the cold as she studied Ethan's face. There were new lines there, softer ones like laughter remembered rather than trauma endured. "Get some rest," she said quietly. "You earned it." Then she left, too, disappearing into the fog with her flashlight beam slicing a path to her security shack. Ethan closed the door and silence settled in. Not the terrifying silence of emptiness, but the gentle silence of belonging. Max circled near the stove and plopped down with a satisfied grunt, stretching his paws toward the fire's warmth. Ethan sank into a donated armchair, the material soft against his weathered palms. His gaze drifted to the wooden table where Sam's journal rested beneath the lantern glow, a reminder that love and loss lived in the same heartbeat. He opened the journal again, fingers brushing over the words his friend had written with living hands so long ago. Each sentence was a thread stitching memory back together. "If you're reading this, live enough for the both of us." Ethan swallowed hard. The words no longer felt like a plea, they were a command he intended to obey. He looked up through the small window the carpenters had carved into the container wall. The night sky spread wide and clear, stars glittering sharp as frost, like the eyes of every soul the ocean had ever embraced. He whispered toward them, toward Sam, toward all the brave hearts lost too soon. I'm still here. I'm trying. His voice steadied. Do you see me? I'm living. For you. For all of you. The wind outside shifted into a softer tone, brushing the walls like a sigh of approval. Max lifted his head suddenly, ears alert, not in alarm, but in recognition. He patted over and nudged Ethan's knee, then stared intently upward at the ceiling, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. Ethan smiled, stroking the dog's fur. Yeah, he murmured. I know. Because even without words, he felt it too. This home, this steel shelter reborn through compassion, had become more than just a place to sleep. It was a monument, a lighthouse for every lonely heart who had once thought the world forgot them. The fire crackled warmly, and Ethan leaned back, letting peace settle into the hollow places war once carved inside him. The night outside was still cold, but tonight he was not. Max returned to his blanket by the fire, curling into a loyal guardian's rest. And Ethan knew without doubt, without fear, that he was finally answering the promise Sam had entrusted to him. To live, to love, to carry the flame that loss tried to extinguish. In this strange, miraculous container of steel and memories, Ethan Cole's life began again. And somewhere far out on the waves, the ocean carried whispers that sounded almost like laughter, welcoming one of its own back into the warmth of the living. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't roar from the heavens, they whisper through ordinary days, through unexpected kindness, through a loyal dog who refuses to give up, or through a man who learns to live again after losing everything. In Ethan's story, the miracle wasn't just the letters or the hidden room beneath the steel floor. The miracle was love returning home after years of silence. It was a reminder that God works in ways we cannot see, stitching broken hearts together, with threads of hope guiding us toward the people and places we need most, even when we feel abandoned by the world. And maybe that's the lesson we carry with us today, that no matter how heavy your past is, no matter how lost you feel, God still writes miracles into your everyday life. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes through strangers, sometimes through a German shepherd who hears what humans can't, and sometimes through the courage to open a door you're afraid to touch. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not walking alone. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, your city, state, or country. We love knowing how far these stories travel and how many hearts they reach. And if you'd like more stories of hope, healing, and the quiet miracles hidden in everyday life, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. May God bless you, your family, and every person listening tonight. May He guide your steps, protect your home, and fill your days with the kind of quiet miracles that change everything. God be with you always.